think that turned on recording. Yeah, it's recording. All right, cool. All right, so I'm Ian Namazuki on here. This is just a little like sort of intro to NMM thing we're going to go through today. So I just have a quick slideshow that we're going to go through just to talk about the theory of painting non-metallic metal a little bit. Once we go through that, I'm going to switch over to my camera and I'm going to paint a little bit of a demo on screen just to go through and demonstrate some of the concepts that we've gone over. At that point, if anybody has questions, like while I'm painting, post them into the stage chat here and tag Red Piano. He'll read them to me and then I'll answer them as best I can on the thing. Once we've gone through the little bit of a painting demo at the end, I'm going to hang around for a while. I'll open it up to like the raise your hand thing or however that works so people can ask more questions if they want. Um, and I'm just going to hang out and paint for a little while. So if anyone wants to just hang out and paint for a while, I'll be here. Like I mentioned, I'm recording this, so we're going to upload it to YouTube after so that everyone on the server can watch it at their leisure. There's also a thread I made earlier this week with some questions, so we'll go through those at the end during the Q&A thing just to make sure that those get answered as well. All right, so without further ado, let's hop into it. So NMM, non-metallic metal, is creating the illusion of a metallic surface using regular paints. It's a complex technique overall, and it's one of the ones that I find there's no real top ceiling on. The best NMM painters in the world continue to keep pushing it and surprising everyone, and there's kind of no end to how far you can go down the rabbit hole. Like I said, today we're just going to focus on the basics. I'm not going to get too caught up in the advanced stuff because I just want people to understand like how to approach this and what makes NMM effective. So what makes the illusion of non-metallic metal work? The most important one is consistent light placement. Um, there are rules to how metallic surfaces reflect light, and it's really based on what shape they are. We've got basically four simple shapes that we're going to go over in a little bit. Anything that you look at is going to be some form of these shapes, either combined together or them by themselves, or just pieces of those shapes. So that's one of the most important things is to figure out what those shapes are and then plan your lights across them in a manner that's consistent. If it's inconsistent, the illusion is not going to work properly. There's going to be something wrong about it. As humans, we see metallic surfaces all the time in our life. It's something like skin tones or fabric, where if it's really off and wrong, your eye is going to notice it right away and tell your brain, hey, something's not right here. So it's our job to create as best of a trick as we can on the eye to make it so that we think, oh, okay, this is a shiny metallic surface. Second biggest thing is contrast. And with contrast, in this sense, I mean contrast in value. So light to dark. We expect metals to generally be at least somewhat reflective. You know, a really, really dull metal is going to be kind of challenging to paint well, whereas something really shiny, that's pretty easy for us to mimic. You can do it pretty simply with just black and white, and that's one of the things that we're going to look at beginning our sketch and refining our sketch when we get into the painting phase here. Um, Playing into that is like a proper balance of values and tones. If you just use black and white, it's somewhat convincing, but you're missing all of these mid-tones that are between your darkest tone and your highest tone to give you more, you know, what the next bulletin information about how shiny the surface is, how diffused the light is on it. Is it catching any imperfections, any scratches, any things like that? So that's something that you work on more after you get sort of the initial placement down, is playing around with the balance of, you know, your midtones. How much of each of these tones do you need to create the proper illusion? And then information, you know, are we dealing with a highly polished metal? Are we dealing with something that has been scratched up a lot? Something that's milled is going to have a different surface than something that's hammered out or rolled out or drop forged. You know, all of this is something to keep in mind when you're trying to paint your non-metallic metal. Is what kind of metal am I going to try and pull off here? Um, a little history on non-metallic metal. It really goes back to Renaissance painting is when we see some of the first non-metallic metal in terms of canvas painting. Metallic paints are a fairly recent invention. So forever, people had to figure out how to convey the sense of a metallic material using just flat paints. And you can see these are some pretty good examples from the Renaissance era that, in my mind, sell the idea that this is a metallic surface. And one of the things I wanted to point out is that first bulletin of consistent light placement. You can see here there's this major reflection on this guy's arm, right? It's a straight line down. You could pretend that these are not separate plates, that this is just one column with a singular reflection point here. And then you get some more information. You get a secondary reflection over here, some other secondary and tertiary reflections here. Similarly here, this is going to be a column, so you've got your one main sort of reflection point. You've got this sort of secondary bounce reflection. Similarly, the consistency of this is what sells it. If this came down here, and then in the next section, this light was shifted over here, and then back over here, it's not going to look right. There's going to be something in your brain that says, hey, that's not how this is supposed to look. And we're going to go over that and how to address it when we start painting, in our planning sketching phase. When we're talking about information, you can see here there's a lot of secondary reflections and a lot more information being brought across. This is a reflection of some other things happening in this room because this is a highly polished surface, so it's going to pick up some of that information and reflect in there. So as you get more and more advanced, that sort of becomes the game of bringing more reflections, more information about the surrounding into it, because that really helps sell a convincing sense of, hey, this is a polished surface, and just like a mirror, it's going to reflect the things around it. That's why, especially if you look at reference pictures of armor, especially armor that's been photographed in like a museum setting, you're almost always going to be able to see the photographer in the armor. There's going to be some sense of that person being reflected there. Alternatively, if you look at stuff that's being photographed outdoors, you're going to see a lot of color information being reflected from the grass, the sky, the sun, other materials around you. I don't think we need to get too far into that today because, again, this is just an introduction thing, but it is something to keep in mind as you keep pushing this technique and working on it further.
Yeah, and has a question regarding this previous slide.
Okay, which one?
He asks the paintings.
Oh God, what have I done?
Oh no.
Oh God, here we go. All right, let's go back to paintings. All right, what's Ian's
Yes,
question?
on the central picture, the round elbow things, is the top disc correctly lit? Shouldn't it be at the top left?
On this part here?
I believe so, yes.
Well, I would say that the light is coming sort of from this general area across and hitting this and then hitting here. So I would say that, catching it on this edge and this edge works. That is one thing with painting non-metallic metal is don't get too tied up with reality. Like to make convincing non-metallic metal, you have to learn the rules first so that you can bend the rules to get the best result. A lot of the time it is about making an artistic decision that maybe in the real world it would do this, but this looks better and sells it better for me now. And that's something that you get more comfortable with the more that you work in this technique. I think to begin with, copying, directly from this is a good way to go because it's a good guideline to work off of. But you will make some artistic concessions along the way. Some of these shapes get so crazy and complex, like this inner creased armor here that has this, somewhat conical shape to it. Like you're just gonna have to make that up because you may not find a one-to-one reference that's going to show you exactly what you're hoping for in that situation. So speaking of the shapes, these are our four basic shapes. Technically, there's only three because like a cone and a cylinder are the same thing. A cone is just a cylinder that has been squished to a point at the top, so they are lit very similarly, but anything that you look at is going to be comprised of spheres, cylinders, cones, and cubes. Spheres, I think, are somewhat easy. We all kind of have a pretty good mental image of what a metallic sphere is going to look like when it's lit up. You're going to have your main specular reflection. And specular is just that it's a very circular reflection, and then generally you'll get another secondary reflection somewhere on the other side of this darker reflection here. Cylinders are really easy. They're linear. There's a very linear light. You'll get alternations between light and dark reflections, and that's a good thing to think about too. Is that metals don't have shadows. They have light reflections and dark reflections. They might be reflecting something that is a shadow around it, but they're not creating shadows on their own surfaces the way that like cloth or something else will. They're still reflective. They're still going to pick up what's around them. Like I said, cones are just a cylinder that the top has been pinched shut. So, like you would expect, it's a linear reflection, but it does taper accordingly to the shape of the cone. One thing that I'll address too is you see the top of this cylinder has these concentric circles. This is only going to exist on flat surfaces, flat round surfaces like this that have been milled. It's this thing called radial anisotropy, and it's basically like because it's been milled, there's these cuts in it that catch light in a certain way and create this reflection pattern. If this was hammered out or rolled out or created in a different way, you wouldn't get reflections like this, though they are pretty iconic, so sometimes it's fine to just ape them onto a surface like this anyway, because people's brains will go, okay, yeah, that's metallic, it makes sense. Cubes are the hardest. If you really like paint a cube like this, it doesn't look metallic, right? So generally with flat, big surfaces like this, it really just becomes a trick of making up something that is convincing, even if it's not realistic, and it can be a really frustrating experience. Because if you just do what this has, like a gradient from dark to light with an edge highlight, it kind of feels reflective, but not really. If you were to break it up so it had one major reflection here and then maybe a secondary down here, and then paint the edges, I think it would be a lot more effective. But again, that's where that creative license comes into play, and you really have to play around with the shape, especially if it's a larger one on a model, until it feels right. And it can be a lot of back and forth to get it to a place where it makes sense. So these are my major tips for people starting out painting non-metallic metal. First and foremost, choose the primary viewing angle of the model, and paint all of the main light reflections based on that. You're going to say, okay, I'm looking at my model this way. I want my light coming from here. Go ahead and we're going to do this when we go into the demo phase and just paint all of those main reflections first. Don't worry about anything else yet. You want to get those marked in and feel confident in them before you start moving on to the next thing, which would be your secondary reflections and edges and so forth. Your non-metallic metal should generally have the highest contrast on the model, like out of any of the other pieces of the model. Not always, but almost most of the time, unless you're trying to paint a duller metal and there's some other material there that's going to be more reflective by intent. You want your non-metallic metal to have the most contrast so that it appears the shiniest thing. That's feeding into that information, to give your brain to say, yeah, that's shiny, it's metal, okay, good, this works. After you've got your main reflections in, you want to start marking in your secondary reflections and make sure that they feel like they make sense, that they're balanced. A really powerful thing you can do is what I like to call a squint test. Hold your model out at fully arm's length and squint at it. Does it feel like it's reflective? If it doesn't, generally that means you've placed your reflections wrong and you're going to need to adjust. If you hold it out at your arm's length and squint at it and you go, yeah, that looks pretty shiny, great. You've put your stuff in the right spot and you're ready to start moving on to refining and nuancing stuff a little bit. Final thing, paint all of the edges. This doesn't mean that everything gets the same value edge highlight. I see that a lot where somebody just takes white and they run it around all the edges. That doesn't look good. That's not how metal reflects light on the edges, but the edges will catch light strongly. Generally, you have to balance out that edge highlight to have it make sense. But if you don't paint the edges, it's going to look incomplete. There's going to look something off with it because a hard edge, where two surfaces meet and it's like an angle, that's going to catch light like crazy. All right.
Ian asks, So for cubes, we more think about them as, quote, imperfect mirrors, end quote.
I mean, all of this is an imperfect mirror, really, right? Like, unless you have the most
Yeah.
polished up, flat piece of metal ever, everything is like a distorted, imperfect mirror, and that's really what you're working on painting. Um, but yeah, with the flat surfaces, get reference, try some stuff. A lot of the time, I find that like weird, almost W-ish shapes, and we'll go over that in a little bit, kind of work well to take up the space and give some good information. But it's really highly dependent on the model that you're working on and the surface and what it looks like and everything like that. Um, a couple of things I wanted to go over real quick, just because I see this a lot with people that are starting off non-metallic metals. Okay, so the first thing I see all the time is this checkerboard approach, where you've got light, dark, light, dark, light, dark, light, dark, light, dark. Metal doesn't look like this. Um, it's kind of a neat little gradient thing, but it's not how metallics look. If you take this approach, it's always going to look weird and wrong. It might look neat and you might like it, but it's not going to look metallic. Similarly, this is the other really common early approach I see where people do two inverse gradients on either side of something like a sword and throw an edge highlight on it. It's kind of a cool way for a power sword to look, but it's not NMM. You're not creating the illusion of a metallic surface. You've just done some neat gradient work. Comparatively, if we look at Richard Gray, he's easily one of the best non-metallic metal painters, especially at a tabletop size figure. He's got this one major reflection up here. Then he's got some secondary reflections that are picking up, maybe a sun or something yellowy in the scene. Again, another brighter reflection point here. But you don't see this sort of ticky-tock back and forth stuff. It's a balance of a very heavy reflection here to the point where it's even blowing out the edge of it here. He's got this sort of lens flare effect going on. And you can see that he's just kind of creating this information and making it up. Like swords don't actually look like this. If you put a sword blade in light, the whole thing's just white basically, if it's in the sun. But this is more interesting, and again, this is where that creative license comes into play. You can see a lot of interpretations of the shapes that we were talking about before too. Like here you've got your cylindrical shapes. This is like a weird flat shape that he's just kind of gone ahead and said, okay, well, this kind of looks cool. Maybe it doesn't make a whole lot of sense in terms of physics and everything, but it works. And this is where you just have to lean into like, all right, I'm going to try this. Does it work? Cool. If not, let's adjust it. Let's move it around. Same with these flat fins here. He's just kind of made some random lines and shapes on here. And I think he does a pretty good job of convincing you that, hey, this is shiny and metallic with that. All right, so that's it for the slideshow. One thing I think that's really important that people neglect when they want to start painting non-metallic metal is reference. Reference is everything. This is my favorite Instagram for reference. It's called Armor Femme. It's just women in armor, which it's just nice to look at. The photography that they have is pretty good. You can see here one of the things we were talking about, like, look at all the green that's in this armor, right? This is reflecting everything around it because it's so highly polished. It's going to be really blue because it's picking up a ton of the sky. We're going to have some greens and stuff from all this foliage around it. You're going to have some of these brown tones reflecting off of the horse and everything. This is really hard to paint and look convincing. Um, I hear people call this sky earth non-metallic metal. I think that term's absolutely stupid. All metallics reflect the sky and earth. This is just a high polished thing, chrome, same thing, whatever. But the whole SENMM thing is just it's stupid. Don't say
It's
that.
a very old term.
Yeah. Here you can see a less polished armor, right? Like this is not nearly as high polished as the last example, but we're still getting a lot of information from the surrounding environment. This is a round shape. We've got our main specular highlight kind of across this whole thing because it's not as polished. The light's going to be more diffused. You're going to have a bigger overall reflection area. And then down here, we've got these greens and browns, similarly down here, reflecting off of the ground around her. Even here, on the pommel of the sword, down on the side of her arm. Um, if you really want to get into painting non-metallic metal, you're going to have to spend a lot of time looking at metallic objects. I stand in my bathroom all the time staring at the kitchen faucet because it's fascinating, and I move my head around, and I look where things go, you're going to end up doing that. You're going to take pictures of random stuff out in the world, and people are going to look at you like you're crazy because you're photographing a doorknob or something. But it's really helpful. It's training your brain to break these things down and see what's going on to make it effective. Right? Like in this, we've got the darker sky up here. We've got the horizon where it's a lot brighter. Then you can see even like the shape of the helmet's reflected in here, the grass and everything. You can kind of see the photographer here. Um, so again, just lots of observation, lots of reference. Anytime I go to paint non-metallic metal, especially if it's something that I'm unfamiliar with, I'll make a board of this kind of stuff and just have it on hand so I can reference it.
Hot Mike has a question regarding the sword you were showing. So does it help more to think of it like we can see the light waves that IRL we can't see regarding the Richard Gray sword?
I think so. I mean, with Richard, he really leans into this like I don't know. I think you would call this like a scattering of light across it, where he gets all like if you watch him work, all of this are really he's sketching in lines this way, horizontally across the sword blade, and then he'll go back and work the long way to kind of blend and incorporate them. I think that's a good way of planning it. It's a good way of sketching it, and it's a good way of seeing pretty early on with minimal effort, like, is this going to work for me moving forward? You know, am I starting to create a convincing illusion? And if not, scrap it, try something else, you know. And that's what we're going to look at when we start painting the model in just a minute here. Excuse me, I'm coughing my brains out. I'm just getting over being sick. All right, so let's switch over to the camera. All right, so up in the top right is the model that I'm going to be painting in this demo. This is a what is it? Uther Pendragon from Big Child Creatives. They made this special mini bust for Steve Garcia's class that I took. Um, what I think is super helpful for planning non-metallic metal is to, one, prime it in black. I like to start from dark. I think it's a really easy way to get all your shadows where you want them to be with a minimal effort. I wouldn't start from white or gray.
You might want to move your mouse over. There you
Is that better?
go. Yeah.
So what I did is I primed this black, and then I just hit it with a quick gloss varnish. This is a good way, and you can see the picture up in the top right here. I took a picture of where I want my light to be. Having this nice glossy surface, so you get some really intense reflections, is a nice, easy way to get a rough idea of where you're going to want your lights to be. Um, so to start, I'm just going to take white, and that's all we're going to work with to be in here is just some white paint, and we're going to start trying to copy the reflections that we've got in our photograph. And I think that this is the best way, especially if you're a beginner, to approach painting non-metallics, because you're only working with two things at this point, right? You're working with black and you're working with white. If you put this somewhere where you don't want it, all you need to do is grab this to erase it. If you start your approach layering like people traditionally do, where maybe you have black and then you've got like a gray with a little bit of blue and then another midtone, you start working up that way. If you get to the point where your reflections are and they're wrong, you have to undo so much work to get back to that point. Whereas with this, it's a really quick, easy way of just sketching it on and going. Sorry, I'm just starting to lose my voice. We'll keep going though. All right.
Get
So
some
another,
water, brother.
and I got some coffee. Um, so an important thing too that I see a lot of people do early on is they worry too much about, see how there's all these different armor plates? Don't worry about the separation between them and everything. If you focus too much on like, okay, I'm just going to paint this one little panel, then this one's not as easy to put exactly where you want it. Just paint over them. You can always go back and add the black lines that you need to separate stuff at the end. All right, so we're just going to grab some white, and we're going to get going. And at this point, too, if there's questions, like I said, just post them up, tag red. He'll ask them to me while I just get going here. So looking at my reference here, I know that one place I'm definitely going to want to start, and actually two. Actually, before I go in, let's look at this. Right, what shapes are we looking at here? Right, overall, This guy is a column. The overall shape of our chest is basically like a kind of boxy column. Obviously, we've got some flatter shapes here. It's not perfectly round, but I would still interpret this mostly as like maybe it's a sphere up here with a column coming off of it, because there is a bit of an angle this way that's a bit more spherical across his upper body. So with that in mind, we're going to be mostly looking at linear highlights coming down this way with a little bit of roundness to them up at the top here, as you can see the way it catches. Like, see how this is rounder here and then it drops into more of a linear shape? Similarly, like this is kind of like a slice out of a cylinder, you know? So we're going to try and keep that in mind as we're rendering in these initial shapes. It's a little wet, hold on. All right, so like I said, just take some white and just sketch. And this is the thing, is this is a sketch at this point.
Yeah,
This
it's
is
in the
not,
way.
oh, whoops. This is not a finished product. We don't have to worry too much about it. We're just making sure that we've got things where we want them to be. And so like when I get down here, I'm not even going to worry about the way his armor is shaped yet with the cuts under it. I'm just going to continue this light down. I know that the light's going to catch over here too because of the way this shape is. We're going to have some light catching here. And this is really loose, right? Like we're not worrying too much about being precise at this point. This is just our beginning. We're going to go back over it. This is not the end result at all. Down here, we can do something like this. Just sort of some linear shapes.
Try to move the model to the right a little bit more. The autofocus isn't catching it. There you go. That's better. That's good.
You know, get our lights in here. Maybe this is a little bit broader based on our reference. And we're going to have some light on this part. This shape over here gets some light. And this is really how I like to work on this, is just getting some basic ideas down. You know, over here, we've got this inside reflection. And we've got a little bit of a reflection up in here. This edge is going to catch. And it's really just about going around, figuring out where that light's going to catch, using your reference, and trying to map it out as best you can.
Yeah, and asks, where did we say the light is coming from?
So we're going to pretend the light is coming like from here, you know, down from this side, catching the model like this, basically. So then in all the places that we think it's going to catch, we're just going to be putting some light. And again, this is when we're looking at our main reflections. We're obviously going to have to add more than this if we want to sell, hey, this is shiny, but this is a good start. And you can see I'm really not being fussy about how clean it is at this point, because you don't have to be. That comes later. This is a sketch, and you know, sketching is an iterative process. You keep cleaning it up, you keep refining it. It's not like how you may learn to paint tabletop models where you just want to go step 1, step 2, step 3. This is a lot more back and forth. So compared to, you know, our reference photo up here, we've kind of got our lights in the places that we want them to be. You know, we've got our reflections up on the crown, we've got our major reflections on the chest, the shoulder over here, the shoulder. Maybe this one needs to be a little bit wider, a little bit brighter. We're going to have some light down in this piece. We can kind of start sketching in the edges a little bit to get a sense. I generally don't worry too much about outlining the edges till the end, unless I kind of need like a little confidence boost, and then I'll edge highlight a few things just to get a better sense of, okay, is this working or not? But it's not the most important step, you know, where we're at right now. So we've kind of got, our main illusions going. I'm pretty happy with where this is now. There's not too much that I'm going to move around. So I'm going to think about, okay, where can we put interesting secondary reflections, right? I think it'll look neat if we have a smaller one coming down here through these shapes. And again, paint over it. Don't worry about, okay, well, this is supposed to be dark under here. We can make that dark later. This works fine for now. Maybe we want a little bit of light catching over on this plate that's reflecting from this side too, right? Just to make it a little bit more than it was.
One asks, isn't this type of lighting more akin to a door/window open in the interior?
No? I don't. What do you mean a door, window?
I have no idea what he means.
Ask better questions, Onia. I'm disappointed in you, Onia.
He
I mean, you
says, foo.
you could. I mean, you could consider it that way, I guess. If full blown light was blowing, like shining on this, and it was really shiny, this whole side of his armor would just be one big reflection, right? That's not super interesting to look at. There's not a lot of information when you just have one giant reflection. So again, this is that like, okay, I have to balance, reality versus what's interesting to look at. Pick out this inside piece here.
Jan asks, after you gloss varnish for the reference, should you matte varnish it back before painting?
You can. I mean, it can be helpful just so that you're not. But at the same time, it's like if you do that, then you don't get to do this thing where you can hold it in the light and say, okay, well, this is how it'll catch. It's a little confusing to look at on the camera. I get that because you're seeing reflections come back at you that are kind of messing with these ones a little bit. But for me, when I'm painting, no, I don't. I'm not gonna matte back over this. I'm just gonna, keep it glossy in case I need to reference something again. Then I can just
Probably the
hold it
only,
back the way I had it in the light and check.
probably the only reason you need to do that is if you were working with thin paint right off the bat.
Right, if it wasn't sticking or something.
Yeah.
As you can see, I don't really thin my paint, especially for this. It works fine. Just drag it out. We're not putting a ton of paint on. We're putting it on very lightly overall. All right, so at this point, right, we've just used black and white, and this is what I was talking about. When we do this and we hold it at arm's length and squint at it a bit, it already starts to look shiny, right? We're already getting this sense that, okay, this thing's picking up light from around it and reflecting it back to our eyes. This is where you start to think, okay, what am I missing, right? Like, if I edge highlight these armor pieces here, it's going to sell the illusion a little bit better. Things like that. But again, we're just in a sketch. We don't have to worry about it too much.
You're off frame.
Yeah, I just need to. But now that we've, highlighted those a little bit, that sells it a little further, so on and so forth. I'm going to do it up here too, just to pick out these edges. And I'm using white right now. I don't want my final edge highlights to all be white like this because there's no balance. Some light's going to catch on his gorget or whatever it is here, the edge of it. And then we'll get a second reflection.
Melanie asks, did you leave out the round thing on his left chest right from our perspective on purpose? Why?
Which thing?
I think the thing on his belt, maybe?
This? Yeah, I'm not worried about this yet. If that's what you're talking about. This is a whole different metal shape and everything. It's not part of the armor. I like to render in one chunk first, like the main thing, like his armor, because then you have a good sense of highlights for the rest of it. If we did want to render that in, right, we would pick out some of this, pick out some of it here, pick out some here, and just kind of randomly give it a bit of light. What are you laughing at?
I don't know if Psych is correcting you or making
What does he
fun
say?
of you. He said gorge yay.
I don't care. I don't speak French. Listen, I speak American, Saka. American boy.
I am right.
Damn right. So, at this point, I think that this is a pretty effective sketch. This is enough for me to work off of. I might correct some things like This line here maybe isn't as straight as I would like it, so we can take a little black, and then we'll put some black in our palette. I generally like to organize my palette by value. I like to keep my darkest value over here, my lightest here, and then mix in between them. I think it's just a good, tidy way of working, but obviously everyone's going to work the way they want. So for this, maybe I'm going to clean this up a bit.
Head in the way.
Oh,
That hair too nice getting in the way.
oh, dude, nice clean hair.
Kid says man needs a smaller head.
You need bigger eyes. So maybe I'll clean some of these shapes up a little bit. But again, I'm not even too worried about it at this point because all of this is going to get painted over. But just as a starting point for a sketch, I think this is pretty effective. Maybe it works a little bit better if we do something kind of interesting, like just a little
Head in the way.
secondary reflection here. Goddamn. I gotta just move my chair. That way I don't get in there anymore. Add a little secondary reflection there, something like that. Maybe we'll bring some more darkness back in. But this is where I would say is a good stopping point for the sketch, if you feel comfortable with it, if you feel like it works and it's doing what you want it to. So now, at this point, it's really like, okay, what kind of metal do we want to do? I'm going to paint some steelish tones today. So for me, that means that I'm going to want to bring in some sort of desaturated bluish tone. I like to have a ready mixed gray because I'm lazy and it's nice to have one. And then some sort of ice yellow color I always find helps a lot. You really can do a lot with not a lot of colors. You don't need to have 20 different steps. You'll see that a lot with non-metallic metal like recipes. They're going to give you each tone you need, so you're not mixing a lot of intermediary or bridge tones. I like mixing. I think it's fun, so I don't mind putting these out and working off of them. But it really comes down to how you like to work. Oh, that one went over there, I guess. That's not where I wanted it. Ooh, that's crusty. Real crusty. And yeah, I wanted these in opposite places, but you don't always get what you want in this world. So from here to actually start turning this into like a finished piece, the way that I like to work is kind of from dark to light again. I've got my light where it needs to be. Now I need to start adding more tones and information. So the first thing I generally like to do is mix up, sort of my second step up from my darkest shadows. So I'm just going to take a little bit of that bluish tone, mix it with a little bit of black, and just get sort of a dark bluish gray color. Something like dark sea blue from Viejo or AK Interactive would be a good thing to use here, although it's going to be a little bit more saturated than this. Or something like a dark German gray, basically just a few steps up from black. And what I'm going to do with this is grab it and just start working from where I know I want my darkest shadows to stay. I'm just going to start working around the edges of those. I'm not going to cover them completely, but I'm mostly going to cover these really dark shadows up. Unless you have super polished metal, you're not often going to have pure black, except for in like where armor panels separate from each other, or maybe in like where it's reflecting the darkest part of the scene. So with this, I'm just going to start making some transitions in here. And this is where you do start to work a little bit more fiddly. It's a little bit less of a sketching phase, but I don't know, still keep it kind of light and loose.
Eternal Day asks why specifically the blue and ice yellows.
Um, Information, really. Like our brains, if you just like think about steel in your head real quick, generally we think about steel as having a little bit of a bluish tone to it, either by the manufacturing process or by the fact that it's reflecting the sky a lot of the time. So adding some blues in there is gonna help sell that information. If you work just in achromatic, no color, black to white, it can look cool, but it's gonna look off. It's gonna look a little weird. If you start incorporating a bit more of hue into it, that's what our brains expect to see. So when you give it to it, it makes the illusion easier to sell.
Hit.
Give you head.
Hot mic gas. Well, he says I had trouble seeing where he saw second reflections from the reference to what he did.
Okay, so that's one thing. The second reflections, you're not going to see them on the reference because this isn't metal, right? This is plastic that's been painted with a gloss varnish. It's not going to reflect light the same way that actual metal will. So the secondary reflections are something that you just need to look at reference for and play around with until you get something that works. Like even right now, I'm seeing that I have these two secondary reflections here. I don't think I'm going to keep that. I don't think it's going to work that well. So at this stage, I might grab a little bit of the black and just erase this one here because it's not working for me. It's not helping with the illusion. So now I think this is working a little bit better. And that's the freedom of starting with minimal colors on this model is you can make adjustments a lot faster. Man, I'm dying here.
I'm gonna throw some of these questions from the thread at you. How would you recommend starting your first NMM? Should you paint a large or small piece?
I think large or small, it does. I mean, small is tougher, right? 28 millimeter non-metallic metal, you don't have as much room to get as much information across, so you have to be a lot more precise to sell that illusion. I think something this size that's like mostly armor is the way to go. There's a lot of STL models that I've seen. There's one that I think Ben Comets did, right? That's just like a gauntlet fist. That's like the best thing because it's got most of the shapes on it. Something that has a variety of shapes, right? So you can learn the different shapes and how to paint them. Something that's got big surfaces so that you can really play around with lots of information. When you get down into, you know, let me grab something. If you try to do non-metallic metal on something like this, right? Like you don't have a lot of surface to work on to try and get that illusion. Like look at his crown, it's tiny. That's basically just some edge highlights and like maybe a little gradient, and you hope that you placed your light right and it sells the illusion. Versus something like this where you've got all this real estate to really play around with where those reflections are and what information they're giving across. So I would say, bust or around this size, something substantial. In general, I'm of the opinion that bigger models are easier to learn new techniques on because you just have so much more space to play around and fuck up and fix it. So again, we're just going to be going around.
Big head.
Ed Big Head. That's a Rocco's Modern Life ref for everyone that's a child in this chat.
Wouldn't a 60 to 70 millimeter scale mini be enough? This bust would take a lot of time to finish, wouldn't it?
This bus, you could do this in a day, easily. There's not too much going on. Maybe it won't be the most high polished thing in the world, but like this is pretty basic, right? There's no back to it. It's just what we're looking at right now. So there's not too much fiddling going on here, which I like. I mean, 75 millimeter can work too, if it's got nice shapes to it, and I mean, that's the problem. It was a lot of 75 millimeter is actually small when you get it in hand. But I mean, find a model that you like. I think is also really important. Don't worry too much about if it's technically proper or whatever. Like, I find this with anything. You're gonna paint what you like and you're gonna finish it, versus painting a model that you hate. You're never gonna finish it. Why would you? This is for fun. This isn't anybody's job, except for Red, because he's dumb.
True.
Oh man, I'm burning up. I'm burning up.
Dankosaurus asks, are there any products that can make NMM easier to accomplish?
Yeah, a good brush helps a lot. I think that's like common advice though, but like something with a nice sharp tip, especially once you get past this sort of sketchy phase. Like you could do this with a cheap, shitty synthetic, whatever, no problem. Once you get in and you're actually trying to pick out little things and add little nuances and stuff, a good brush goes a long way. Don't skimp out. Get a nice Kolinsky sable. I like Raphael 8404s. Use whatever works for you though. Other than that, like I said, gloss varnish can be helpful, or having a glossy primer. Um, but NMM isn't a product-based thing. It's a mindset, it's a technique, it's observation and translation of what you're looking at onto a model. So I think that more than anything, just taking the time to practice and thinking about what you're doing, what you're trying to accomplish. Sorry for all the coughing. I'm just getting over a cold.
It's not really picking up anyways.
Okay, good. So again, I'm just going around and softening the shadows into the rest of it. I like to work with really like intentional sketchy strokes. I usually work, if my highlight's coming this way, I like to make my strokes back and forth like this just because it's a blending mechanism in of itself, right? If you're putting strokes next to each other and then more strokes next to each other, they're going to start blending by dint of that, especially if you start working with thinner paint.
Do you always use white as the max highlight and black as the darkest shadow for NMM?
Not always, always. I mean, most of the time, I would say yes, because most of the time people do want to paint something that's relatively polished. Black, not so much. Black, like I said, you won't see black on metals unless you have a really, really high polished surface that is then picking up a very dark reflection in that band from somewhere else. But definitely white. White for us is the brightest you can go. It's the highest value that you can put on a model. Nothing gets brighter than white. So if you want to sell that, what I like to call the tings and dings, those really little places that sing, that really have that brightness to them, yeah, absolutely. You're going to want to have white on there. It's just a matter of balancing that white. If you put too much of it, it's not going to look right. If this thing is like 80% white, it's just going to look white. You need to reserve it for where it matters. And that's why we're painting over this sketch, and it's not just a final product, right? This is for us to plan where our lights are and kind of how big and what shape. And then we're going to bring in other paints to paint over them, with that staying as our reference on the model. All right, keep going here. And again, I'm not going to paint this to completion. I'm just going to kind of sketch it out how I would, getting us most of the way across there. In some places I find, my light's a little too strong, so I've got somewhat thinned paint. I'm just going to paint over it a bit, and that's going to knock those reflections down a bit.
Jan is asking, I mean, you'll probably get to it, but he's asking where the yellow is going to be placed in relation to the blues.
The yellow is going to be our highlights. It's going to be basically our like penultimate highlight color, with white being the ultimate highlight color. And the reason that I like to use that ice yellow is, in my mind, there's the sun is somewhere in this scene, right? The sun's going to have a little bit of a yellowish cast to it, and I think this ice yellow, this really desaturated yellow, does a good job of telling that story, as it were. And you can see it's not, it's not a super straightforward approach. You're just kind of zipping around, adjusting things a little bit, playing with the values till you're starting to get something that works for you. And I think even at this point, with the squint test area, it's cleaning up even more, right? Like it's looking a little bit more like the story that we want to tell.
Some username, Rocks or Socks, asks, why is the ice yellow?
Because I peed on it, Rocks. Because I peed on it.
Jan asks, so no brown/green for ground versus blue/yellow for sky/sun.
No, you definitely could, and that's just taking it one step further, right? Like for here, this is going to get you good beginner NMM. Just these tones here. You don't need anything else. If we wanted to get a little bit more advanced, I would absolutely bring in something like, we've got this fallen grass tone from Chimera that's kind of like a desaturated greeny tone. That would be good to do grass reflections. They sell this set from Lan Mikhail Pekarsky, who's arguably one of the best non-metallic metal painters in the world. He chose all these tones. This is commonly what he'll use for his steel. This is not a bad way to work, just because it gives you all the stuff and a little bit of a, not a good guide, but a crappy little guide of how to incorporate them. But yeah, you could definitely have these browns and greens that would be catching more of these, the ground facing reflections, like maybe this side of his cod piece, and over here we could bring some of those in. The underside of his breastplate where it's more facing the ground. And that's the other thing too. Think about the direction that these planes are facing in, right? Like everything that's facing up towards the sun, I'm going to use more of the blues and the yellows in because that's the sky. Anything that's facing more towards the ground, we would bring more of the greens and browns in because it's facing the ground. And just like a mirror, it's picking up what it's pointed at. It wouldn't make sense to bring greens in up on the chest piece unless like maybe there was tall trees somewhere off in the distance or something like that. Just sort of extra considerations. But again, we don't want to get too far down that rabbit hole. We're just focused on doing a simple rendition today that's effective and sort of the steps to get you there. One thing I want to say too, anybody who watches this now or later, whatever, if you're working on a non-metallic metal project and you want some feedback, make a hobby help thread, tag me in it. I'll do my best to get to it and give you, some feedback. You can consider that homework, I guess, if you want to do it. There's no, obviously it's not mandatory. It's up to you, but I'm happy to take some time. I could do a Photoshop sketch over whatever you're working on and try to help correct if there's anything wrong or give you encouragement or whatever. I will caveat that with I am not the best non-metallic metal painter in the world. I'm not winning Golden Demon with my NMM or anything like that. So there may be things that come up that I'm like, I don't know, man, that's into my wheelhouse. Deal with it.
Head.
Shoulders, knees, and toes. Knees and toes.
One asks, do you think having other materials painted on a model can be helpful to visualize the final effect?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, honestly, if I was working on this model from start to finish to actually complete it, I would get my main lights blocked in on the metals, and then I would go sketch everything else in to make sure that I had consistent lighting across the model. Because if you do this nice non-metallic metal and it all makes sense, then you highlight his face like he's lit from over here, it is going to fuck your brain up. You're going to look at it and go, that is not right. I don't know why. It looks wrong. You want to have everything be cohesive. And that's definitely more of like a holistic approach across it. I think there's a lot of value in stopping somewhere around here and fixing the rest of it.
Memer Mastodon is asking, given a cylinder that is perfectly vertical, where would you place the warm and cold reflections?
I mean, wherever they make sense, right? Like if this was a perfect cylinder and your warm light came here, all of your warm reflections would be on that side. If your cold light was then coming from this side, all of your cold reflections would be on that side. They don't just magically hop across to the other side. So it's something to consider in the whole mix. I don't do too much warm and cool other than like what's in the environment around it. Bringing in like strong directional light or OSL or something is a lot trickier because there's a lot more factors that you need to start planning around at that point. But it can certainly be done. It's just more work, and again, more reference, more repetition, more practice. Here I'm taking a little bit of this blue and kind of cutting into some of my main highlights just to show where there's a little bit more light catching, a little more reflection, but again, still working pretty loose and not going too far into it yet. One of the other things to keep in mind, right, is that your secondary reflections should never be as bright as your main reflections. If this ends up as white as its brightest reflection point, there should not be white in your secondaries. They are not reflecting as much light as your primaries. So in this case, like maybe I would leave this sort of pale bluish color.
So you're going over the white you've already applied entirely with the blues.
Yep. or like mostly like here. Obviously, I didn't everywhere. I'm gonna bring
Mhm.
yellows in there instead to cover most of the rest of it. But across the rest of the model, yeah, where it's like my secondary reflections, I'll mostly just leave those in like a blue. Maybe
Right.
add a little ice yellow to them. Maybe mix a little ice yellow. Who knows? Again, you don't really want to leave white in too many places because if you do, it's going to rob the power out of your main white reflections.
Do you use the same logic with NMM on Chrome?
Chrome is NMM. Chrome is just a very high polished metallic surface, right? Um, so the biggest consideration, right, is that the higher the polish, the more it's going to reflect everything around it. So if you're painting chrome, you basically have to treat it like an actual mirror. And that's why you'll see when people do that chrome thing, you'll see the ground, a dark horizon line, a bright horizon line of the sun, and then it moves up into blue above it because it's reflecting the whole landscape around it. Other than that, I mean, with something highly polished like that, basically the whole thing becomes a reflection, so you have a lot less dark elements. But it's not really all that much different. As much as I don't really love his work, if you look at Flamon's Chrome stuff, like that's a pretty good rendering of what something that polished would look like. Um, Actually, here I'll show you one of my favorite examples though of something that's not quite Chrome, but I think is really effective. How do I do this though? We'll go back to this real quick. Um, so this by Kirill Kanev, you can see this is. Oh, good, it's not going to show. There we go. You can see that this is a very highly polished surface, right? It's almost all white around here because of how much of the sun it's reflecting off of this. And then you've got some greens and browns from the ground and grass around it, maybe some battlements or figures that are standing around her. But this is the kind of consideration you need to make with painting something highly polished is that the sun is going to be, by dint of the strength of its reflection, blow out a lot of the information, right? And that's something I didn't talk about before because it is a little bit more advanced though. But like the dark reflections and the brightest reflections are going to have the least amount of information because it's either too dark to see what's going on or too bright. It's where your midtones are that you're going to get the most information, the most scratches, the most colorful reflections around it, everything like that. Am I back on the thing now? Did I do
Yes.
it right? All right, cool. So again, we've got a little bit more, you know, color presence to this here. This is a little too blue for me, so this will all get knocked down in the end. But it's not linear. This is back and forth. So don't worry if at this stage you're like, oh my god, this thing's way too blue. That's okay. We can always knock it down. It's not the end of the world. I'm gonna get a little bit more on this shape down here. This one under it. But because we overpainted this, we did make sure that we kept really consistent light placement, even though these are separate shapes, right? You can see on the underside of here, this light goes down. We'll paint over that eventually with some darker tones to help separate everything else out. One thing I like a lot with this process too is like, if I'm working with this color and I need it to be a little bit darker, just use the same brush, don't rinse it out, pick up a little bit of this, it'll mix in your brush. It's an easy way to get sort of the transitions smoothed out. And you can see I just really like working in small strokes here. I think it's an easy way to get the blending across. You could really exaggerate this too if you wanted something like a brushed metal. That would just be lots and lots of small horizontal strokes, right? And that would give you the sense that something had been brushed repeatedly in the same direction, which I think can be kind of fun to play around with different metallic textures. Same thing if you wanted something more hammered, using stippling will give you a cool hammered sort of sense out of things because it creates a lot of randomness and imperfection, which is what you definitely see in something that was, hammered out and maybe not polished or finished all the way. Now we're going to grab a little bit of that ice yellow and I'm going to work even further into this main reflection here with it, just sort of softening the edges and bringing it up. You can see it's pretty similar value to white, but not 100% like white. So we do still have some range above it to go when we want to push up. Hold on, I need some water.
Water break.
What was that?
I said water break.
Yeah, I'm going to grab a drink real quick.
Mm-hmm. Again, if anyone has any questions, post them in the stage channel and tag me, ideally. And I will sling them at Nan Bansi.
All right, that's better. Now we got a nice cold seltzer. Keep going. So so again, we're gonna just keep working between our different tones. I might take a little bit of this gray, mix it with a tiny bit of black, a little brighter than I want. For more of a mid-tone, bring a little bit more of that in here.
Head.
And there's no real hard rules about what color goes where. A really cool video that people can check out. It's a little bit older, but on Craft World Studios, if you're familiar with them, they have this thing called like, what was it, like NMM Stew or something, where one of them paints this cauldron and they just use this like crazy mix of colors. And it doesn't look like it's going to be metallic, and then by the end it looks very shiny metallic. Again, it's no recipe or anything, just knowing the theory of everything will get you there.
Thanaroa asks, my preferred method to paint is normally building up from shadows rather than your approach. Should I try to learn this or just go with what makes most sense to me?
I mean, I would give this a shot at least once, right? Like, just to see in a like, you don't have to work this way every time. I like to use this as an example, especially for teaching, because I think that it just gets you in the mindset of like placing your main highlights properly and everything. If you're more comfortable working up from dark to light, you absolutely can. Um, like I said, it's just going to make adjusting stuff on the fly a bit more difficult because you're dealing with so many more tones to go back and fix and move around and stuff. So I would at least one time just try planning out your main reflections in white and then sketching around on it. You can also do this. Plan out your main reflections, take a new reference photo of that plan, and then black over it and go dark to light again. At least you have a better on the model reference to work off of for how you're going to work up to those places. I just have seen a lot that when people do that, they end up with inconsistent light placement down the model because they haven't just bravely marked it on there. If you're just in and you're just sketching on this one little plate, and then you try to match down here, maybe it's a little cattywampus, maybe it's a little off. But again, it's really whatever works for you. There's not the only time that NMM fails is when it doesn't look shiny and metallic at the end. And that's generally just because either the contrast isn't high enough or the light placement is wrong. But how you get there doesn't matter as much as the fact that you got there, at least in my mind.
Mike asks, I'm still struggling a bit with secondary reflections. What are your biggest rules of thumb for deciding where they should be?
Um, I mean, reference. Like, go look at where they naturally occur, and then the biggest thing is not just like where they are, but like why are they there, right? Like, why would we get reflections over here? Generally, because the sun's coming from this direction, it's bouncing off of something outside of the frame and then coming back as a weaker light. I just try and think about, okay, what environment is this in? What's around it? And what's going to angle reflections where. A good rule of thumb, though, is just like next to your main reflection, take a little bit of space that's darker, and then have a lighter reflection like this is. I think a lot of the time, the secondary reflections are the ones that you end up moving around more than the main ones. I think the main ones are pretty easy to figure out and get marked in. It's the secondaries that you might look at and be like, nah, that doesn't work. I need to mess with it.
A couple people have asked where the mini is from.
So this is from Big Child Creatives. It's not currently available for sale, but it should be in the future. Um, I'm kind of hoping that they'll do a whole line of these. But this was made especially for Steve Garcia Torcathor for his non-metallic metal classes that he teaches, which I happen to take at Nova. Which, if you get a chance, take a class with Steve. He's a fantastic painter. He's a great guy. He's a really good instructor. I highly recommend it. And really, at this stage, like, right, we've kind of got it, right? It makes sense. Maybe we need to be a little bit more bright down in these panels and across here to come up to where how the main chest reflection is. But from here, it's really just screwing around with it until you get it where you want it. There's not too much more to do here other than refine, and that just takes time. Once you've got your main lights in and marked out and figured out, it's now a balancing game of midtones and secondary highlights and your dark reflections. And then kind of once you feel like you've got stuff in a pretty good spot, like say if I was pretty happy with all this, this is where I might go just for a little confidence booster in the whole thing. Go back with some black and go in carefully and just start dark lining between all of your shapes. Doing this is going to make the separation between them a lot stronger,
Frame.
which is going to start making everything feel more cohesive once you get in there and reestablish those separations between the plates and everything. And again, that's why you want a really nice sharp brush. This is really hard to do well with a brush that doesn't have a nice sharp tip to it. And it makes a huge difference at the end. Both these dark lines in between and the edges being painted. And again, they don't all have to necessarily be highlighted. Sometimes you might paint the edge with some sort of tone like this that's darker because it's not catching that much light, but it's still catching some, if that makes sense.
Don asks, so the dark lines are a bit of a hint at.
What now?
He said the dark lines are a bit of a hint of volumes.
Yeah, and just showing that like these are two different plates, right? Like if you just paint over it and you don't go back there and clean that up, it's gonna feel like it's just this one run-on shape. When in reality we can see it's not, right? It is these two different plates here. Um, the dark can help give a sense that like, okay, I know I said metals don't have shadows, but this piece of metal could cast a shadow onto the one under it, like a cast drop shadow. That's a little more advanced, but adding things like that help tell a lot of a story too. And that's what that's what painting is for us. It's storytelling, right? We're trying to tell the person the story that, hey, this shit's shiny and it's metal and it's reflective.
Meme Mastodon asks, any examples of areas where accuracy is critical versus areas where you can get away with fudging stuff a bit more?
I mean, your main lights, you need to be pretty accurate on the placement with your main lights. If those are off, if they're all cattywampus, no matter how smooth your blends are or how properly you've picked your tonal values between stuff, it's going to look wrong. You have to have your reflections dialed in properly. That's where the main focus of the whole thing should be is marking those main reflections and then keeping them there as you continue to develop it out. I think a lot of people get too caught up in this idea that you need to be really good at glazing to do non-metallic metal well. You don't. I haven't done any glazing yet, right? There's no glazing on this yet. It's fairly effective because the light placement is consistent. You could glaze it all day, and if your lights are in the wrong spot, it's going to look weird and not the way that it's supposed to.
Vanarella asks, any advice on painting metal trim? I can understand the big plates and metal surfaces, it's those long, small lines of trim that confuse me.
Um, Trim gets really complicated, right? Because it's not when you look at it and you try to break it down into basic shapes. It's not something like this, where this it's pretty easy, right? It's a cylinder here. You could imagine that it's a chunk cut out of a cylinder. What you really need to do is take your time with the trim shapes and look at them and try and think like, okay, what basic shapes are making up this overall shape and paint it accordingly. If you're painting, 28 millimeter wargaming trim and shit, you can just fudge it a lot of the time, and no one's ever gonna be like, that's not the way it's supposed to be, because they're not shapes that we're super familiar with in our day-to-day life. And that's one thing too is the more readily recognizable something is, the harder you kind of have to work at the illusion. If it's some crazy fantastical shape that no one's ever seen, you can kind of fudge where the reflections are on it, and most people are going to look at that and go, "Uh-huh, yep, that works for me." The inside of this would catch a little bit of light here. So we want to add that in. Again, just more information.
Do you think real life reference or painted reference is more or equal?
Um, I think that they each have their own merits, right? Real life reference is going to show you what the real world does, which is an important thing to understand. It's that old axiom of like, if you want to break the rules, you have to learn them first. So I think there's a lot of value in real life reference. I do think, especially for beginners, though, there's a ton of value in, if you have a model and somebody's painted it in non-metallic metal, copy that shit. You're going to learn a ton from that. But when you're doing so, don't just copy it mindlessly and then that's it. Think about, like, why are things happening on this model? Why is this reflection here? Why is there a secondary reflection here? What does this represent? I find that you have to have intentional practice if you want to improve on things. If you're just doing it mindlessly, it's not really going to benefit you all that much at the end. Not to the same degree, anyway. You'll be good at copying, but you won't be good at figuring out how to do it on the next model if you only copy and don't think about why things have been done. And again here, I'm really just going back and forth and playing with the size and shape of some of these reflections until it feels like it's right to me. Um, and that's going to be both, reference and experience, and looking at this guy up here and thinking about, okay, is that right? Do I need to move it over? What's going on here? Again, one thing, this reference is not law. It's not a metallic surface. It's not reflecting the same. It's not to scale. That's one thing. Like if people want to paint OSL with an airbrush, it doesn't respect scale. This is not life size. The airbrush is.
So there's some things lost in translation there, and that's where the interpretation comes in. Otherwise, we would just airbrush our models and call it a day, but it doesn't accomplish the same thing. In some of the places where I find it's too blue, maybe I'll bring in more of this neutral gray tone over it instead, to just knock it down a little bit. And again, that's all just part of this balance of tones, right? Like on a highly reflective surface, you have a pretty quick transition from dark reflections to bright ones. If this was more of a dull surface, it would be a smaller gradient between the two. And that's again, that's a thing from like observation. Like if you look at something like this isn't the most polished rim, but it's pretty reflective. Look at how tight that band of light is. There's almost no dithering at the edges. You've got your secondary reflection over here that's coming off of, something else in the room, probably this warm light that I have to the side. You can even see my hands creating a reflection in it, right? So if I move my hand over here, we're getting a lot more information and it's changing the shape and size of the reflection. Same with the distance to the light. If I bring it closer, we've got a much wider band. If I move it further away, the band's going to tighten up. And that's what you'll start doing with everything metallic in your life.
True.
I'll be playing
Did
with
you paint
spoons at the dinner
silk
table.
in a similar way?
Kind of. I mean, silk's a funny one because if you look at silk fabrics, it's a lot of white. But it is the same principle where because it is so shiny, you're going to have your color tone, your hue, like say if you have red silk, it's going to be red, 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 maybe a little bit of pink, and then white. And that's really hard to accomplish without making it feel like weird or off. I think shiny fabrics are one of the hardest things to paint on models well. They take a lot of forethought and planning in my mind. Um, and again, it would be weird like if you paint a model that has non-metallic metal and silk on it, right? Like you have to make a conscious decision. Is the silk shinier than the metal, or is the metal shinier than the silk? And you have to commit to that. And even then, it might look weird in the end. You might be like, okay, what's up with this metal fabric it has? That's why I think it works best in something like this, where it's going to be metal, and then fur, and then flesh and hair. It's a better spectrum of textures to work with that's really going to make the metal feel metallic in the end. Once if we painted this guy's face, like we had talked about earlier, it's really going to help sell the rest of the illusion because now you've got flesh to contrast against this metallic. If you painted the flesh and you brought your highlights up to pure white on the skin everywhere, it's going to read like the face is metallic too, just because of the information coming from the non-metallics around it. So it's definitely a balancing game. And one thing too, this is not a quick technique. um, there's no like speed painting NMM really. You can do quick and fast and dirty stuff that'll look kind of like it, but if you want to get a good result out of this, be prepared to sink some time into it because you do have to mess around with it quite a bit and play back and forth. And I would get ready to be comfortable with mixing because you do have to mix a lot of intermediary tones if you want, a better result in the end. Not to say that you have to be great at like mixing your own colors and everything, but be comfortable mixing 2 or 3 paints together to get what you want on here. And again, from here, it really is just messing around with it until we start to get where we want to be. And it's a lot of back and forth and a lot of just, oh, does this work? Yes or no? Okay. If yes, continue. If no, paint over it and try again. And for me, this speaks a lot to like, I don't know. I think people strip models too fast in this hobby. You know, if I got to this point and I thought, okay, this kind of sucks, don't strip it, just paint, just keep painting, keep going. You could fix basically anything unless you've created a lot of weird texture and stuff, or you've obscured detail.
What do you think are the best miniatures or objects to practice NMM on? To learn NMM?
Knights in armor. I've taken a lot of classes from Eric Swinson. He's somebody that I work with, you know, with private coaching and stuff. And one of the things we were talking about is, you know, him wanting to get really good at NMM. He went out and he bought every armored knight model he could find, and that's all he painted for like months. You know, FER for Fernando Ruiz, right? Is that his name?
Yeah.
Mostly historical company. They have tons of guys that are just in full blown armor, like the examples we were looking at early, and their models are pretty affordable. I think that they've got a great catalog for somebody that wants to work on non-metallics. Similarly, Big Child Creatives, their Camelot, their Arthurian Legends line, that this bust is like taken from the main model of. Half of them are in full suits of armor. They're not super expensive models. One nice thing too, like you paint one, you're happy with it, great. All right, now paint it black and do it again. Um, Repetition is key.
Hot Mic, the company is FER Miniatures, Fernando Ruiz Miniatures,
Yep, FER,
and
good company.
Chimera, or Big Child Creatives.
Yep, Big Child Creatives. Pegaso slash Chimera has some. I'm not a huge fan of their models, but they do have some. Yeah, find stuff with as much armor as you can. You know, don't get something that just has a sword. Like, get something that's got a sword and gauntlets and a breastplate and as much as you can cram in one session, because it's really easy to put your main lights on just one item in the scene and have that be accurate. It gets a lot trickier when you have a lot of different surfaces that you have to consider simultaneously, and that's where you're really going to push yourself forward the most, is taking on a challenge. You know, don't just go for the easy win. Do something that seems kind of maybe a little bit out of your league, and you know, swing for the moon on it. I'm a big fan of taking big risks. Big risks pay off.
Be brave.
Yeah, you talk to the guys who have been painting for 25 years and they wonder why they don't get any better. It's because they've been doing the same damn thing for 25 years without ever, you know, deviating from their recipes or their methods or whatever. You got to shake things up if you want to improve. Um, and you have to paint with intention. You can't just keep doing what you were doing yesterday and think that magically you're going to get better at it. You got to look at what other people are doing, what you're trying to accomplish, make notes for the next time, try something different.
If you try hard, you'll get hard. Wait, what?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you stay hard, you'll stay hard. You know, and even just in here, like bringing in some of these edges and stuff, like obviously it's going to need cleanup at the end, but that alone is really helping sell the reflectivity of it now.
The Tooch asks, can you explain the tweaks you're making right now and why you're making
I mean, mostly I'm just looking at what
framing?
value what value wise works and doesn't work, right? Like I'm noticing that the highlights on this main the thing that splits his chest in half feel a little too strong for me. So I'm just taking some similar but slightly darker tones, like from this grayish color here, and knocking them down a bit. Um, it's hard to describe what you're doing when you get into this stage of it, because it starts to become more intuitive of like, okay, that doesn't work, and I need to make this minute adjustment to get it back in line. But again, part of this is that this needs to be the brightest point. Some of these edges will be close, but they still shouldn't be quite as bright as this. So now I'm looking around and analyzing like, okay, where else do I either need to start smoothing my transitions or playing with my values and where they're at.
Coming up on 1.5 hours. I don't know how long you want to go.
Yeah, I think this is probably right around where it is good to knock off. Um, I do want to do other things today too. So, um, obviously, like I said, you can do this. I could sit here and do this all day, and I could play with this and refine it and push it. But for, probably about an hour of painting, I would say this is in a good place where I feel comfortable where everything is, and I know now it's just about pushing the rest of it in. If you go take an NMM class at something like Adepticon or Nova or Las Vegas Open or wherever else in the world you might be that has sort of in-person classes, don't be surprised if you don't have a finished model at the end of it. But take as much as you can out of the lesson and bring it home with you, and don't paint over it. Don't finish it. Keep this as a sketchbook. This is a record of what you did in that class that day, and I think there's a lot of value in having that around on your shelf to be able to reference back and say, oh yeah, I remember when so and so said, I shouldn't do this, or I should change this, or this needs to be like that. I have all of the models that I've ever taken, classes with around for that reason, that they are my sketchbook as a painter. Um,
Do you
yeah, I
know of
think.
any classes or events where people could get classes in Australia?
Um, yeah, I think there are some. There's something in Canberra, I think, that Dave Colwell does. I know he's starting to do in-person instruction again. Um, Dave is a fantastic painter. Um, Trent is down
Is-
there too, right, Red?
I think so.
Yeah, Trent Dennison. Look
Big
look on his
Dino.
social media.
Yeah.
Big Dino Paints. Yeah, see if he's doing any in-person lessons. He's somebody who is a fantastic instructor and a great painter. I mean, it can be tough if you're not already linked into your local scene to find out what's going on, but ask around. It's even in the states, it's tough outside of conventions. We don't get all that much. A lot of the time, though, painters, if you reach out to them and you say, "Hey, I want to set up a class. What are the parameters for it?" They'll let you know how many people you need to have sign up to make it worth their time, and then from there, if you have the gumption to set the class up, reach out to your local painting scene. Say, "Hey guys, I want to get Dave Colwell in here to teach us how to paint. Who wants to do it? It's going to cost this much with this many people." I find that you do have to kind of be the driving force behind these things sometimes. They're not always just readily available. Hoping that continues to change, but that's kind of the way it is right now.
Just like I mentioned, Meg Maples. I forgot.
Oh yeah,
She used to paint.
I think so. Again, though, reach out. I mean, even if somebody like Dave won't do it, ask him if he knows anybody who does. These people are probably better linked in than a lot of us are to who's doing what. Just reach out and say, hey, I know you're not teaching right now, but do you know anyone else who's talking about having classes and where, and can I get information on it?
You can also organize your own classes if you contact like just about any of the big painters, like Sergio Calvo or somebody. You can contact them and be like, "Hey, can we set up a class in my city?" And you have to, of course, go to your local hobby shop, whatever, find people who will pitch in for a class to get them out.
Yep.
That's always an option.
Yeah, Banshee. Alfonso, he'll do a class basically anywhere if you get him enough seats, and it's worth his time to come. A lot of these people are teaching year round, and this is a big way that they, you know, augment their income as professional painters is to come and teach. So don't be afraid to reach out. They're just people. They're not celebrities. They are not anything all that special.
Mastodon asks, not really understanding how the upper left chest plate has been painted. Do we have enough time for a quick overview of that bit in particular, if it hasn't been done already? The part that's slightly obscured by the belt across the middle of
Up here, I
up
mean, I
there,
just picked.
Mastodon? Yes.
I I just picture the light coming here, right? Like some of it's going to be obscured by the belt here, so you're not really going to get all that much of a reflection on this side of the belt. Maybe that's more gray tones. Once it gets past that, it is going to catch this curvature here, and some light's going to get caught on that. So that's why I have this triangular shape here, because it's like it would be a specular kind of highlight almost, but a lot of it's been cut off, so the remaining geometry informs me that a triangular highlight up there is going to look kind of cool. It probably needs to get cleaned up a little bit. In reality, I probably need to bring it a little bit closer up to the gauze or whatever we're gonna call it here.
Yes, the
But more or less, that works for me. Maybe it's not 100% accurate to reality, but again, that's where taking artistic liberty is part of your prerogative as a painter, right? You want to say, I believe that this looks good this way, and lean into it, and then assess it at the end. If it really looks like crap, change it. If you're happy with it and it works for you, leave it. The paint police aren't going to come break your legs because you decided to interpret something differently than somebody who's painting next to you. That's one fantastic thing about taking these classes is often at the end of the class everyone's going to put their models together and you get to see everyone else's interpretations. No two are ever going to look the same because there's not one set method to approaching this, one set outcome. Everyone has their own spin on it and how it's going to look in their mind. Otherwise, this would be a very boring hobby. Oh, maybe we clean it up a little bit like that. Maybe that works a little bit better. But, again, I just changed that somewhat drastically with just a couple of quick applications. Don't worry, don't fuss too much. Just get in there and do it. If you don't like it, it's easy to get back to it. It's not the end of the world.
out of frame.
You're out of frame. Obviously there's other elements like we would want to work more on his crown. We could start tackling this chainmail that's around his head. But for an hour or so, I'm pretty happy with where we got to this. And again, especially at arm's length down here, I think that the reflections are very effective in telling you the direction of the light where it's coming from and that this is a shiny metallic object. Is it 100% perfect? Is it a finished piece? No, but I think we got the lesson across. So I think at this point, I'm going to wrap it up. I'm going to hang around the regular voice chat for the next couple of hours. If people have other questions, feel free to hop in there. I'm just going to be hobbying and painting on some other stuff. Thank you to everyone who showed up today. Like I said, I'll start a thread in the work in progress channel just for NMM feedback questions. If there's anything that you have in there after this, pop it in there. If there's stuff you're working on that you want me to take a look at and give feedback on, throw it in there. I think we're going to plan on doing another one of these sort of instructional things in the next couple of months. If you guys have a topic that you'd like to see, pop it, DM me, throw it up somewhere. I'd be interested to see what you guys would like to see. Again, thank you. I appreciate all of your time and questions and everything. And looking forward to keeping working with you guys.